Okay, Lily, you got this, I muttered to myself, staring down at the thick stack of papers. A marriage contract? Not exactly the fairy tale I pictured, unless the fairy godmother was a loan shark and Prince Charming was, well, Caleb Smith, my supposed husband-to-be for the next 2 years, purely transactional. My family's colossal debt, bless their spendthrift hearts, had somehow become my personal albatross, dragging me down faster than a lead balloon in the ocean. This contract was my life raft, even if it felt more like a leaky dinghy in a hurricane. Caleb, on the other hand, was a whole vibe, or lack thereof. He introduced himself as a regular office worker. Which, sure, if your office was a Fortune 500 company and your regular was signing multi-million-dollar deals before breakfast. He moved with this quiet intensity, like a cat stalking its prey. But his eyes? Oh boy, those eyes were like deep pools of molasses, sometimes calm, sometimes stirring with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Something ancient, maybe. Definitely not regular office worker eyes, more like secretly runs a global empire and judges your life choices eyes. And honestly, considering my life choices currently involved marrying a guy I barely knew to avoid bankruptcy, he probably had plenty to judge. Just a business deal, I kept telling myself, a mantra I hoped would eventually stick. No emotions, no complications, just two people making mutually beneficial arrangements. My brain, however, was already doing mental gymnastics, picturing myself trying to explain this to my grandkids one day. "Grammy, how did you meet Grandpa?" "Oh, sweetie, your grandpa literally bought me." Yeah, probably not going to be a heartwarming story. But hey, desperate times, right? My mind zipped back to a particular memory, one I usually filed under Childhood Fever Dream, Do Not Open. It was from when I was about 5, a super stormy night. The kind where the wind outside sounded like a monster trying to claw its way in, and the rain hammered against the windows like 1,000 angry drummers. My parents, being the good-hearted but occasionally oblivious people they were, had dashed out to help Mrs. Henderson down the street, whose roof was apparently trying to make a break for it. They left me with my teen cousin, Bethany, who was probably more interested in her latest pop magazine than keeping track of a terrified 5-year-old. When the storm really started to get wild, Bethany, bless her anxious heart, decided the safest place for me was the pantry. "It's super secure in here, Lilybug," she'd chirped, shoving me into the dark, cramped space before slamming the door shut. She swore she'd be right back, but then, probably distracted by the chaos or a particularly juicy celebrity gossip column, she just forgot. Classic Bethany. I still remember the darkness. It was like a thick blanket had been thrown over my eyes, heavier than any night. The air got thin real fast, smelling faintly of stale bread and dried herbs. Every time the house groaned with the wind, I jumped. But then, from outside the pantry door, a sound started. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, steady, and so ridiculously persistent. And worse, there were whispers. So faint, like someone breathing my name against the wood, over and over. Lily, Lily. My 5-year-old brain, trying to its best to make sense of the scary grown-up world, decided, oh, that's just me. I'm hitting the door, trying to get out. And the whispers? Definitely just the wind squeezing through the cracks, or maybe my super active imagination playing tricks on me for being so scared. It was a neat little package of self-deception, one I clung to. The whole thing gradually morphed into a nightmare I used to tell at sleepovers, always with a dramatic shiver, but never really believed was anything more than a bad dream. 20-something years later, it was just a weird childhood anecdote, a little dusty story in the attic of my mind, totally disconnected from my fancy new debt-ridden life. Or so I thought. Married life with Caleb, even if it was just a contract on paper, was peculiar. The guy had some habits. For starters, he loved the dark. Not in a cozy, romantic, dim lights kind of way, but in a sitting in a pitch-black study for hours kind of way. I'd walk by his study, see the sliver of light under the door, and then realize the room was completely unlit inside. Just him, probably reading some ancient texts or plotting world domination in the dark. And then there was the tapping. Sometimes, when he was lost in thought, his index finger would drum against the table, a low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Not quite a beat, more like a pulse. It was so regular, so there. It would just weave its way into the quiet of the house, a constant, low thrum. And the way he looked at me sometimes, not angry, not even curious, just empty. His eyes, those deep molasses pools, would bore right through me, like I was transparent. It would send shivers down my spine, making me want to check if I had forgotten to put on pants or something equally embarrassing. I'd just try to ignore it, telling myself it was just his cold businessman demeanor. You know, just a regular billionaire CEO doing his billionaire CEO thing. His house, a sprawling old mansion with more rooms than I knew what to do with, also had its secrets. The basement, for one. There was this one door, made of heavy, dark wood, always locked. A faint, earthy smell, like wet soil and old things, always wafted from beneath it. And every now and then, when the house was particularly quiet, I could almost swear I heard a faint scratching sound coming from behind that door. Like something small, restless, was trying to dig its way out. But come on, Lily. A rich guy's house, a weird smell, a locked door, and some phantom scratching? Probably just old pipes or mice. Or maybe Caleb was secretly a DIY enthusiast trying to fix something in there. I'm sure it's fine. Everything's fine. But then, the dream started coming back. Not just as a hazy memory, but as vivid as the day it happened. The cramped darkness, the thin air, the storm outside, the terrifying feeling of being forgotten. And the sound, that low, persistent thump, thump, thump from outside the door. And the whispers, breathing my name. Lily, Lily. The terror felt fresh again, the kind that makes your heart pound against your ribs. And the worst part, the tapping in my dream. It was exactly like Caleb's finger tapping. The same cadence, the same monotonous rhythm. My brain, bless its overthinking heart, screamed, "Coincidence! Just a coincidence! You're stressed, you're tired, you're in a strange house with a strange man, and your brain is just being extra dramatic." But the more I tried to push it away, the more the two sounds merged in my mind. Caleb's tapping, the dream tapping, they became one, a haunting soundtrack to my uneasy sleep. Sometimes, even when I was wide awake, going about my day, I could almost hear that faint, rhythmic sound echoing in my ears, a persistent little whisper of unease that I couldn't shake off. It was like my childhood terror had found its way out of the attic of my mind and decided to move into the living room, complete with a terrifying, very familiar soundtrack. And honestly, it was starting to freak me out. A lot. My brain was officially on DEFCON 5 alert, and honestly, it felt less like a sophisticated military operation and more like a squirrel trying to figure out a complex lock. I couldn't shake off that tapping. It wasn't just a background noise anymore. It was a persistent little itch under my skin, echoing my childhood nightmare with unnerving precision. Caleb's finger drumming on the polished wood, the same monotonous thump, thump, thump from outside that pantry door. It wasn't just a coincidence. My gut, which had always been pretty good at sniffing out trouble, usually of the financial kind, but hey, a gut's a gut, was screaming at me. So I started watching him. Not in a cute, "oh, isn't my husband adorable when he's focused" way. More like a confused cat observing a particularly odd human. Every time he'd get lost in thought, those deep pools of molasses in his eyes would go distant, and his finger would start its little drum solo. I'd pretend to read or fiddle with my phone, but my eyes were glued to that rhythm. It was too perfect, too identical to the sound that had haunted my 5-year-old self. One evening, Caleb had retreated to his dark study, a regular occurrence, leaving a book splayed open on the coffee table. He was probably off contemplating the mysteries of the universe, or more likely, which obscure tax loophole to exploit next. I, being the nosy but utterly normal person I am, sauntered over. Not to snoop, obviously, just to tidy. As I picked up the hefty tome, some kind of obscure financial history, because of course it was, a brittle, yellowed piece of paper fluttered out. It was an old newspaper clipping, the kind you'd find at the bottom of a dusty drawer. It talked about some massive financial fraud years ago, a whole scandal involving a defunct investment firm. Nothing that screamed murderer or even secret basement monster, just boring old corporate malfeasance. But the way it was tucked in there, almost intentionally hidden, made me pause. Why keep this? And why in that specific book? My suspicious meter, already cranked up pretty high, decided to go full siren mode. That little piece of paper was just the appetizer. The main course came courtesy of a deep dive into the mansion's attic. It was mostly filled with cobwebs and forgotten furniture, a real treasure trove for any self-respecting ghost. Buried under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, I found an old, clunky laptop. Clearly Caleb's, given the faded sticker of a company logo I recognized from some of the very legit business magazines I occasionally skimmed. I powered it up, half expecting it to explode or unleash a horde of digital viruses. Instead, it opened to an ancient desktop with neatly organized folders. And boy, oh boy, did those folders sing. Emails, financial reports, board meeting minutes, all of it screaming one thing. Caleb Smith, my regular office worker husband, was not just an employee. He was the CEO, the chairman of a massive conglomerate. The rumors I'd heard before signing the contract, the ones he'd so casually dismissed, were not just rumors. They were the gospel truth. "Well, butter my biscuit and call me surprised," I muttered, scrolling through the evidence. He hadn't just lied about being a normal guy, he'd crafted an entire persona. This wasn't exactly terrifying in the serial killer sense, but it definitely knocked the wind out of my sails in the trust department. If he could lie about something so fundamental, what else was he hiding? My entire business arrangement suddenly felt like a house of cards built on quicksand. I immediately did what any sane person would do. I called my best friend, Chloe Evans, via video call. She picked up, looking perfectly manicured and far too cheerful for my current existential crisis. "Girl, you look like you just saw a ghost," Chloe chirped, sipping from a ridiculously oversized coffee mug. "Worse, Chloe, I saw his bank statement," I deadpanned, trying to lighten the mood but failing miserably. I told her everything: the tapping, the dark study, the locked basement, the old newspaper, and then the grand reveal of his CEO status. Chloe, bless her heart, tried to be practical. "Honey, rich guys, they're basically walking, talking mystery novels. It's probably just, his 'I'm too humble for all this wealth' shtick, some weird billionaire thing. Like how some of them wear the same gray shirt every day to focus." She made air quotes around focus. But her nonchalance didn't help. My face, I could tell, was a train wreck of worry. Then, as if the universe decided I hadn't had enough on my plate, Chloe paused. "Speaking of Caleb," she said, her voice dropping a notch, "I vaguely remember hearing something back in the day. Just gossip, like he had a pretty gloomy past. Something about big trouble when he was a kid, like family drama or some event that really messed him up. But nobody ever knew the details. It was all super hush-hush." She waved it off, probably thinking it was just a random tidbit. But for me, it was like a tiny pebble dropped into an already churning sea of doubt, creating new, unsettling ripples. Gloomy past? Big trouble as a kid? It wasn't just quirks. These habits, this darkness, the tapping, it was all connected, a symptom of something deeper, something that felt cold and ancient. My gaze drifted toward the basement door. That heavy, dark wood, the faint, earthy smell, the scratching. Maybe it wasn't old pipes or mice. Maybe it was something else. I felt an undeniable pull, a terrifying urge to see what was behind it. A few days later, emboldened by a sudden rush of desperation and maybe too much coffee, I decided to investigate the basement door myself. I crept down the stairs, the old wood groaning beneath me like a judgmental grandmother. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. The air grew cooler, carrying that faint, musty scent. I reached the heavy door, my fingers tracing the cold, rough grain of the wood. It was locked, of course. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Nothing. Just the faint, distant hum of the house. Just as I was about to give up, a shadow fell over me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Caleb stood up atop of the basement stairs, perfectly still. He hadn't made a sound. His eyes, those deep molasses pools, were fixed on me, devoid of any discernible emotion. Just a blank, piercing stare. It wasn't angry, it wasn't curious, it was just there. A silent, unwavering gaze that seemed to peel back my skin, dissecting my every thought. He didn't say a word, didn't move a muscle. He just watched. And under that gaze, every nerve ending in my body screamed at me to run. I slowly, awkwardly retreated, feeling the oppressive weight of his silent observation until I was out of the basement, out of his sight. The door to that mysterious space remained locked, and my unsettling questions remained unanswered, hanging in the air like a chilling premonition. Later that week, I found myself in his study again, observing his bookshelf. It wasn't huge, just a modest collection of intimidatingly thick books. I had this sudden, ridiculous urge to move it. Maybe, just maybe, there was a secret passage, because why not? At this point, I was practically expecting a bat signal to flash in the sky. I put my shoulder into it, grunting, straining. The thing was bolted to the wall, or glued, or maybe made of lead. It didn't budge an inch. I scoffed, feeling my muscles protest. Apparently, I wasn't strong enough for secret passages. Then, a couple of days later, I was walking by the study. The door was ajar. Caleb was inside, casually repositioning the same bookshelf I'd tried to move. He held it with one hand, like it weighed nothing, shifting it effortlessly, a small smile playing on his lips, completely oblivious to my gaping jaw. Behind where the shelf had been, a small, dark wooden door was revealed, almost blending into the wall, a door I had never seen before. My breath hitched. He moved it like it was made of papier-mâché, and my biceps were just for show. The ease with which he manipulated something so stubbornly fixed for me sent a fresh weight of unease through me. My attempts were futile, but for him, it was a mere flick of the wrist. Then there was this other thing, this really weird thing. I was asking him about a work event, some company gala he'd attended. He was recounting the details, perfectly coherent, perfectly normal. But as he spoke, I noticed it. His eyes. They were a fraction of a second behind his words, a slight, almost imperceptible delay before they caught up to the appropriate expression. When he said something pleasant, his eyes would follow, a beat later. When he feigned annoyance at a colleague, the emotion flickered in his gaze after the words left his lips. It was like his emotions had a dial-up connection to his face, a slow, unnatural processing. It gave me the distinct feeling that he wasn't truly feeling those emotions, but rather he was meticulously simulating them. Every polite smile, every casual glance felt like a performance, a carefully constructed facade. My world, already a chaotic mess of debt and fake marriages, now felt like a bad horror movie. The tapping, the basement, the lies, the effortless strength, the lagging eyes, and that childhood photo. I was scrolling through an album on his old laptop again, a collection of pictures from when he was a kid. There he was, a little boy with a warm, genuine smile, squinting into the bright sunshine in a vibrant garden. He looked so normal, so sweet, so unlike the man who was my husband. I remembered a rumor, or maybe it was just a hazy detail from my nightmare, that the Caleb from my childhood had a small distinctive scar above his left eyebrow from some playground accident. But in this photo, under the bright sun, there was nothing. No scar. His brow was smooth, unblemished. I zoomed in, then zoomed out. "That's weird," I murmured, my finger hovering over the screen. I always thought he had a scar there. Was I just imagining things? The image, meant to show a happy past, suddenly felt like another piece of my reality was being slowly rewritten, erased and overwritten with a version I didn't recognize. The cheerful facade of the child in the picture seemed to mock me, a silent testament to how little I truly knew or could trust about the man standing beside me. It was like looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face in a story that was rapidly becoming unrecognizable. My childhood terrors weren't just dreams, they were chapters in a book I was only just beginning to read, and every page turned brought a colder, more insidious truth to light. The air in the mansion, once merely quiet, now hummed with a tension that was thick and suffocating. It felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the silence around me was anything but empty. It was filled with the promise of something terrible just waiting to unfurl. My brain had officially upgraded from DEFCON 5 to full-blown existential panic, red alert, squirrel on crack. Every weird little thing about Caleb had clicked into place, not like a pleasant puzzle, but more like a rusty trap. The tapping, the basement door, his normal office worker act, which was about as convincing as my attempt to cook anything beyond instant noodles, the effortlessly moved bookshelf, those creepy crawly eyes that felt like they were on a dial-up connection to his emotions, and then the kicker, that missing scar in his childhood photo. It felt like someone had swapped out the entire Caleb Smith hard drive, and I was only just realizing it wasn't the original model. Honestly, at this point, I was just waiting for a parade of clowns to emerge from the locked basement door, juggling live chainsaws. Because why not? My life was already a bizarre circus act. I mean, here I was, shackled to a contract husband who was either a super secret CEO with a penchant for playing poor, or, something way worse. And all for money? What a brilliant life choice, past Lily. High five for being a financial genius. Not. The mansion, which used to just feel big and echoing, now felt like it was humming with a low-grade, constant dread, like it knew something I didn't, and it was just waiting for the right moment to spill the tea, probably with a dramatic thunderclap. I tried to focus on my debt, because, hello, that was still very real and probably growing with every minute I spent spiraling. But how do you focus on spreadsheets when your husband might be a something? My mind kept replaying Mrs. Davis's bland observation, her correction. It just felt like the pieces of my reality were being rearranged by some invisible, sinister force. I needed air. Or maybe just a distraction that didn't involve me accidentally stumbling upon Caleb's secret lair filled with miniature piranhas. Because why not? My life was already a bizarre circus act. I mean, here I was, shackled to a contract husband who was either a super secret CEO with a penchant for playing poor, or, something way worse. And all for money? What a brilliant life choice, past Lily. High five for being a financial genius. Not. The mansion, which used to just feel big and echoing, now felt like it was humming with a low-grade, constant dread, like it knew something I didn't, and it was just waiting for the right moment to spill the tea, probably with a dramatic thunderclap. I tried to focus on my debt because, hello, that was still very real and probably growing with every minute I spent spiraling. But how do you focus on spreadsheets when your husband might be a something? My mind kept replaying Mrs. Davis's bland observation, her correction. It just felt like the pieces of my reality were being rearranged by some invisible, sinister force. I needed air. Or maybe just a distraction that didn't involve me accidentally stumbling upon Caleb's secret lair filled with miniature piranhas. So, one particularly sunny afternoon, when the world outside still pretended to be normal, I found myself wandering through the mansion's sprawling, slightly overgrown garden. It wasn't exactly a Zen garden, more like a botanical testament to we used to have money, but now we prefer mystery. Old rose bushes with tangled thorns sprawled everywhere, their blooms mostly withered, looking like they'd seen better days. Kind of like my hopes and dreams, honestly. I figured a little fresh air, some gentle sunshine, and maybe tripping over a rogue root would snap me out of my impending doom spiral. As I meandered past a particularly dramatic-looking fountain that was more chipped than chic, I spotted Mrs. Davies. She was a fixture here, an old-timer with more years on this estate than I had on Earth. Her hair was a neat silver bun, and she wore a practical gardening apron, diligently snipping away at the deadheads of the neglected roses. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of calm you only get from someone who's seen it all and has decided nothing really surprises them anymore. She looked like a sweet, harmless grandma, the kind who bakes cookies and might secretly know all your family's dark secrets. Not that I had any family secrets besides my own questionable life choices. "Afternoon, Mrs. Davies," I said, trying to sound chipper. It probably came out like a squirrel trying to sound like a lion. "Ah, good afternoon, Miss Lily," she replied, her voice soft and even, without even a hint of the chaos that was currently residing in my skull. She barely looked up from her task, her pruning shears making tiny, decisive snips. Snip, snip, snip. It was almost meditative, which was exactly what my brain was not doing. I leaned against a chipped stone bench, watching her. The silence stretched, comfortable for her, but for me, it was just another empty space for my anxieties to fill. My mouth moved before my brain could stop it, which, let's be real, was a pretty standard operating procedure for me these days. I had to fill the silence, right? I began, plucking a dying rose petal and rolling it between my fingers, trying for a casual, haha, isn't this silly vibe. I had the weirdest memory the other day. When I was little, like 5 or something, I got locked in a pantry during a really big storm. I remember thinking I was knocking on the door myself, trying to get out. And the wind, oh my God, it sounded just like someone calling my name, whispering it. I let out a light, self-deprecating chuckle, the kind where you want people to know you're not actually still scared of the pantry. It was such a scary dream, one of those ones that stick with you forever. My parents always told me it was just a fever dream or my imagination running wild because of the storm. Mrs. Davies stopped her snipping. She straightened up, slowly, her back probably protesting, and turned to me. Her face held that same placid, unchanging expression, as if she was about to correct a minor detail in a recipe, not drop a bombshell. She looked at me, not with concern, not with curiosity, but with a simple, almost weary factualness. "Oh no, darling," she said, her voice still as even as the perfectly trimmed hedge a few feet away. She even gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "That knocking wasn't you. Goodness me, that pantry door was very thick back then. A little thing like you, barely taller than a rosebush, couldn't make such a sound, bless your heart." My casual smile, the one I'd plastered on my face, started to crack. My hand, still holding the rose petal, froze in midair. "That," she continued, her gaze drifting over the crumbling stone walls of the mansion, as if recollecting something as mundane as the weekly grocery list, "that was young Mr. Caleb knocking from the outside. He wanted to play hide-and-seek with you. A very special game, he called it." The rose petal slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, fluttering silently to the damp earth. Thump, thump, thump. The memory, which I had always attributed to my own tiny hands, suddenly echoed with a force from outside. "And the whispering, calling your name," Mrs. Davies went on, as if she was discussing the weather, "that was him too. He kept standing outside, whispering your name through the crack, over and over, and tapping on the door. Not hard, mind you, just a gentle, insistent rhythm. His parents found out later, of course. They were very, very angry. They had you treated for a long time after that, to help you forget about it all. They said it was for the best." My breath caught in my throat, refusing to move. My body felt like it had been encased in ice, every muscle locking up, every nerve screaming. My eyes, I knew, were wide and vacant, staring straight ahead at nothing, unblinking. The world didn't explode. It didn't even shatter. It just stopped. Everything went quiet, not the peaceful quiet of the garden, but a profound, deafening silence that pressed in on me, suffocating me. If it wasn't me knocking, if it wasn't the wind howling, then that thump, 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 and those whispers calling my name, what were they? And what kind of game was that? A cold, ancient terror, far worse than any nightmare, seeped into my bones. It felt like I was waking up, not from a dream, but into a chilling, inescapable reality, a story that was never meant for me to remember, and a husband who was anything but what he seemed. The air, once merely crisp, now tasted of dust and buried secrets, a silent, chilling promise of what was yet to unfurl.